When all the helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, abide with me. Swift to its close, helps out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around us see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guidance they can be? Through cloud and sunshine, oh, abide with me. I fear no foe, with thee at hand to bless. Ills have no waste, and 'tis no bitterness. Where is the sweet, where great thy victory? I triumph still if thou abides with me. Amen. Okay, our speaker for this evening is Joshua White. Thank you again, and I pray we're blessed.
Good evening, everyone. Have we had a good day? I hope so. Hope we've all been blessed and learned something. Hope we've been challenged. Challenge is good for us also. And our topic this evening is an extremely important one, fundamental to true education. It is also one on which we often have technical problems, and that has already started tonight. Praise the Lord, that was resolved just now. But we need to have a special word of prayer because throughout the planning of this event and even starting now, we can see that Satan is not happy with what the Lord wants to accomplish here. And so we're going to start with a word of prayer, praying for the tech issues and also for God's Spirit to be with us as we begin. Our dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for the blessings that you've given us today. Thank you for everyone who is here and that you've brought us here safely. Thank you for the privilege and the opportunity to meet here and learn more of you and of your ways. Father, we know that Satan is not happy with what we're doing here and with what you want to teach us. He wants to distract us, and he wants to prevent these messages from going forth. And I want to pray in a special way for the live streaming and the technology involved, that you will place your hand over that and may it move forward without any problems. And Lord, for each one of us here tonight, may the Holy Spirit be here in a mighty and powerful way to give us understanding, clarity of mind, and a practical application for all that we discuss. And I pray, Lord, that you'll speak through me. May this message and these words be from you. For it's in Jesus' name I ask and pray. Amen. Amen. Okay. Our topic this evening is somewhat in two parts. Our first part is a topic that I think maybe there's several here that I know are familiar with, where we're going to study a little more into this message of and the counsel of waiting until around 8 to 10 for the formal academic study. And we're going to talk about that. And so I know some of you have heard that material. It's good to repeat it though, right? Good to hear it again. And it's good to lay that foundation. Then we're going to take some of that also in the second part of the message and apply it into some other principles to keep in mind in early childhood. How many have ever grown a fruit tree or have a fruit tree in your garden? Oh, wow, quite a few of us. Okay, how many are familiar with the process of starting a fruit tree from nothing? Now, most of us, if we buy a fruit tree, we buy it in a pot, right? And we transplant it. How many are familiar with the process needed before you bought that fruit tree? Anyone? Okay, very few of us. Let me explain a little bit of how that works. There's something called grafting. Now, you have to have a rootstock. That is obtained in different ways. Sometimes you can plant a seed of a certain variety, and there's different types of rootstock that help determine the characteristics and the disease resistance in various aspects of that tree. But the rootstock is not going to produce the fruit that you want to eat. If you want a particular, let's say you want, I'm just going to name a variety. Do we know the Golden Delicious apple? Heard that variety? Okay, common variety. If you want a Golden Delicious apple, you cannot plant a Golden Delicious apple seed. You will not get a Golden Delicious apple. You'll get something else that tastes probably pretty bad. You actually have to grow a rootstock first, and then you take some wood from an existing Golden Delicious apple tree, that's called scion wood, and you graft it into the rootstock, okay? Now, that rootstock then, that graft then has to bond into what you're grafting it into, and it takes some time. It has to develop, it has to intertwine and become strong. Then the roots of the rootstock need to continue to develop and grow strong as that graft bonds, and this all takes some time. It takes about 3 years for the graft to become fully strong, for the roots to develop well, and to reach a point where you are ready to start producing fruit. So here we have a tree that's maybe about 3 years old, and we can start expecting to get some fruit from that. Although this tree right here really has too many flowers, you would want to pluck some of those flowers off so you didn't stress the tree. So what will happen if, let's suppose you grafted this tree and right away in the first year it produced, let's say, 10 apples on this little bud right here, which theoretically could happen. What do you think would happen with that graft that's not fully bonded? With the weight of the apples, it'll break the graft, right? And the same with the roots. If the roots are not strong, disease will take hold, the fruit won't be good. So you see, there's a period of time in which a strength must be developed to prevent disease later on, to have a healthy tree, and to support the weight of fruit bearing. What's interesting is you can trick a tree into producing earlier. Let me show you a picture here. This is a real photo, someone on a fruit production forum that I found. They have taken an established rootstock and they took some budwood. It's called a fruiting spur from a pear, I think this was. And they grafted it in, and it immediately flowered first year. How exciting, right? I don't have to wait 3 or 4 years to get fruit. What's going to happen with this? It's going to break off the graft. Exactly. And the person recognized it. He said, don't worry, I plucked all the flowers off, because he understands what needs to happen. But this is a very good example, because what will happen is you might end up with something like this. That poor tree. And it's exciting, isn't it? Oh, look at all this fruit I get to eat. When in reality, you have weakened this tree for life. It will never be strong. It will never be able to resist disease. If those branches don't break off, it will never resist disease as well. There is a great object lesson in all of this. And I'm going to continue to kind of refer back to this as we talk through these lessons. We read in Child Guidance that the lessons learned, the habits formed during the years of infancy and childhood have more to do with the formation of the character and the direction of the life than have all the instruction and training of after years. So what happens in the first few years is a vital time of forming roots, of connecting the graft, of developing strength so that it can support fruit bearing later on. And what happens in the early years form the character of the life. These branches on this tree will never be straight and tall, will they? They've been bent while they're young. They've grown like that. Now, I mentioned this principle yesterday. Let me read it here. Parents, it says, should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature. The only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be in the open air amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. So what is it saying? In the first years, who should the teachers be? Parents, okay. What should the textbook be? Nature, it says, all right. The classroom should be out of doors, right? It says the open air. Now, I just want us to pause and think, let's make a contrast here. Is this a normal kindergarten curriculum? Yes. Yes, so let's go back here. It says, fast as their minds should comprehend it, they should open before them God's great book of nature. And it says the only schoolroom, and it says the most familiar textbook. And we would want to put that together with the statement that I read last night that says the mother should not use textbooks, should not use books at all. And I believe there is a statement that says the only textbook, The Treasures of Nature. So there's different terminology used, but thank you for asking that qualification. Definitely the only schoolroom should be out of doors. So what is happening in the world? With the opposite, exactly. We see the push to get children away from the parents. We see the textbook is certainly not nature these days. If children learn anything about nature, it's usually from a book about nature, not actually getting out in nature. And then the classroom being the out of doors is, again, a rare thing. So, and a lot of people say, well, that's okay. I mean, children are learning. That's the important part. They need to be learning. Well, true, they need to be learning. But we need to ask the question, what should they be learning? That little fruit tree, it is destined to produce fruit, but is there a time to produce fruit and a time for growth and development, right? So there's stages of development, and we need to understand this. And I just want to read here a statement from a scientific article, and just mentioning sort of a summary of what we're going to look into. And it just points out the very fact that there is no research evidence to support claims that earlier is better, talking about this push for the academics at an early age. By contrast, a considerable body of evidence clearly indicates the crucial importance of play in young children's development, the value of an extended period of playful learning before the start of formal schooling, and the damaging consequences of starting the formal learning of literacy and numeracy too young. And so this is the research that this writer is just summarizing and saying we don't have research indicating that trying to push it earlier is actually helpful. But let's delve into some of that research. And I do want to say, what I'm covering tonight is about a half hour, 40 minutes of material that I could spend 5-6 hours on. right? I mean, we have entire books on this topic. So if you have clarifications, please feel free to raise them in the Q&A. If you want more material on this, you can look this message up on YouTube. I have various messages where I do go into it in greater detail. We'll have books available on the resource table tomorrow. So there's a lot more, but we're just covering an overview. So if it piques your interest, please continue to study. So let's consider some brain development, first of all. There are various aspects of brain development. We have synaptic pruning and growth. We have specialization, apoptosis, all sorts of things happening. But one of the most important is something called myelination. Myelin is an electrically insulating compound, coats the axon of the neuron. It speeds the information transfer. And this is a major, as I mentioned, a major part of development. When we see a child, they're learning to walk, they're learning to talk, they're learning to reason things, they're developing their mental abilities. A lot of this is founded in the process of myelination, because myelination is what enables the transmission of information along a neuron with efficiency. Previous to myelination, it's pretty inefficient. Now, this process of myelination and development occurs on a schedule. And from conception to 15 months, we have very basic brain development. From 15 months into 4.5 years, this is when the child is developing the limbic system, which has a lot to do with emotional security, very connected with relationship development. This is why children need to be with their parents as much as possible, especially mom, during this age when they're developing their understanding of connection, relationship. This is vital. We'll talk more about that later this week. From 4.5 into about 7 years in girls and about 9 years in boys, we have the Gestalt areas that are developing. And I am just emphasizing that boys do have a difference of development there. Tomorrow, I'll talk more about this more in depth in our session on boys. But I think most parents, if you have raised a boy and a girl, you've noticed big differences in development and at least in behavior, which is based in the development. So there's about a 2-year developmental difference there. And I say difference, not that one is slower than the other. The way we often measure it, we tend to say that one is slower than the other, but that's really not the case. It is just a difference in development. And then at around 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys, we have the logic areas of the brain that begin their major time of development. And we can generalize this in left hemisphere and right hemisphere. It's not strictly an anatomical thing between the hemispheres, but it's a good generalization to say that the left hemisphere tends to deal with detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, reasoning skills, while the right hemisphere tends to deal with images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. All right, so looking at these two areas of the brain, which would we need if we were going to sit down and learn from a textbook? The left, absolutely. You're going to need the detail, the language, the logic, all of that is essential for academic learning as we know it. Not to say you're not going to use the right hemisphere, but you need that left. So let's go back to our schedule. We see the major stage of the logic areas of the brain, that development doesn't really kick in until around 7 years in girls and about 9 years in boys. And then the frontal lobe also, which not going to go into right now, but that starts at around 8. It's major surge, especially the primary motor cortex, which is very important for handwriting and things like that. So, what's a typical school starting age? Let's face it. 4 or 5, yeah. If you're in France, it's 3, I think now is compulsory age. It keeps getting earlier. Some of the Scandinavian countries still have 7, which is amazing. But we keep seeing a push for earlier and earlier. But even if it's 7, you're just barely getting a start on the development of an area that's really needed for academic learning. So, just to summarize what we're talking about here, the areas of the brain responsible for many academic types of learning are not developed until around 8 years of age and even 10 in boys. So, can we speed this up somehow? That's really what we're trying to do. Can we speed it up? No. It is a myth that we can accelerate a child's developmental milestones. Children are kind of pre-programmed to reach those points. Let me explain. Let's take a little child. Let's put him in class. He's 5 years old. We're going to ask him to do something that that the regions of his brain responsible for that learning have not really fully developed yet. Really haven't started their major time of development. So, what will the brain do? How will the brain respond to this challenge of being asked to do something that it doesn't have the correct region developed for? The brain will say, okay, I don't have the correct region. Let me find somewhere that already has developed. Now, what has developed at this early age? We have very basic thinking centers. They are not really the higher thinking centers that are needed for the academic learning, but they're the basic ones. And the brain will say, okay, I guess I'll use this already developed region. And it starts making the learning happen through that area of the brain. The problem is, later on, let's say the child is 9, 10, 11, they do have the development necessary. The brain has already formed a habit through the wrong part of the brain, through the wrong area. It's formed a learning habit, and when the correct region has developed, it's not going to revert to that other region because it already has a learning habit. And what do we have? We have, at the very least, a stunted understanding of a particular subject. But it often displays itself as a learning disability, as burnout, as a hatred of a particular school subject, simply because it was so difficult for the brain and the learning was such a challenge, even subconsciously at this early age, that it resulted in a learning problem. If a task is asked of the brain for which the corresponding region is not matured, it will form neural routes through lower, more developed sections, resulting in almost permanent organizational damage. So trying to force a child to learn a concept for which they're not ready can actually damage, or we can say at least disorganize, the unmyelinated brain. And there's a lot of research that I can go into on this. I'm just going to read a couple of statements quickly here. This is from Dr. Jane Healy, an educational psychologist, in her book Endangered Minds. Before brain regions are myelinated, they do not operate efficiently. For this reason, trying to force children to master academic skills for which they do not have the required maturity may result in mixed up patterns of learning. If the correct brain system isn't yet available or working smoothly, forcing may create a functional organization in which less adaptive lower systems are trained to do the work. So we're training the wrong area of the brain to perform the learning. And what will happen is, as she continues, trying to drill higher level learning into immature brains may force them to perform with lower level systems and thus impair the skill in question. Let me give a simple example I think we can all relate to. Let's say we're going to teach math. 5 years of age, we say, great, time to get out the math textbook. We open the textbook, it's about addition, and then we try to teach them how to do the calculations on paper. It's a bit of a challenge, but with enough repetition, we can drill it in, right? And this is how we usually do it. So they finally figure out how to add the 3 plus the 5 and all those sort of things. Later on, you give the child a word problem. Do we know what that term is, a word problem? A real life situation in math. You say, you know, if I have this, I'm cooking a recipe and I have to measure this, but I want to cut the recipe in half, how would I do it? Something like that. And a child can do all the calculations on paper, but you give them that real life scenario, and what kind of response do you get? Any teachers here? You get a blank stare, right? I don't know how to do that. And you say, well, yes, you do. You know how, you've done this calculation before. I've seen you do it. But you see, they have no connection between the real life situation and the calculation they're doing on paper. Why? Because they've learned it on paper in an abstract way from an early age. It's been routed through the basic thinking center of the brain that can do that by rote over and over, but they lack the conceptual understanding of what they're actually doing. Whereas if we flip that around and we learn practically from an early age where they grasp the concepts, then later on you take that and you put that on paper when the brain is ready, and in minutes they'll learn what usually takes months and years to drill into the brain. And so what we can actually create by starting too early is something called learned helplessness. They start to believe that they cannot learn particular subjects because it's just been so frustrating at an early age. And as Dr. Healy continues, any learning that has to be pushed into a child may end up doing more harm than good. And here is the scenario we find ourselves in. Plunge daily into the fire of inappropriate expectation, children's early promise shrivels, non-learning becomes a habit. They can be labeled, treated, exhorted, eventually tutored, but the basic issue remains unchanged. The school and the child are on different schedules. So we need to be patient. We need to allow that brain development to occur before teaching what is inappropriate for the age. But does this mean a child cannot learn math? Does this mean they cannot learn science? Not at all. But you need to learn this in practical, hands-on ways rather than sitting down with a textbook. Is there math to learn in the kitchen? Yeah? Loads of it. How about in the garden? We talked about this a little bit last night. Can you learn math in the garden? Can you learn math in a workshop? Can you learn history through telling stories? Can you learn science through everyday life and in being in the garden? Can you learn botany? And there's so many ways to learn the academic subjects. It's not your focus at this age, but especially when you're dealing with countries that require this type of learning, then make the learning practical and hands-on rather than depending on the textbook. But your goal is character. Now, it's not only the brain that suffers. Let's talk a little bit about eye development. The ability to use both eyes to focus on a subject, very important for reading, as well as two-dimensional focus, does not fully refine and develop until about age 7 to 9. In fact, full foveal refinement is more like 11 or 12. So what happens is as we ask a child to try to focus on a printed page and read, it can actually cause a lot of stress to the eye because it's not developed fully yet. And this can cause an inflammation of the eyeball or a stress on the physical eyeball, and this can lead to myopia. Do we all know what myopia is? Is this a term you're familiar with? No. Okay. Nearsightedness. Are we familiar with that term? Okay. Two different terms, same condition, nearsightedness. It's when you look into the distance and it's blurry and you squint to see something into the distance, right? And you have to come closer to be able to focus on it. That's the most common eye problem in the world today. And it is very linked with close-up work at an early age. So to understand this well, let's see, the normal eye here is very rounded in shape with a focal point at the back of the eyeball, whereas the myopic eye becomes elongated. That changes the focal point to farther up in the eyeball. Now, when we look into the distance, say you look out the window or something right here, even just looking up front as you're looking at me, this is a natural, relaxed state for the eyeball. It's comfortable, it's not stressing it. But when you look at something up close, be that a textbook, be that, let's just do a sample here. You pull out your cell phone. Where do you use it? Out here? Not usually. Usually you put your elbow against your body and it's just a few inches from your eyes. That proximity, similar to reading, can actually be stressful to the eye because what happens is these muscles that control the shape of the lens, called the ciliary bodies, they have to contract when you focus on something up close. That's okay for a short period of time. But as you pass the 20-minute mark, especially in childhood, those muscles then will start to struggle to relax again. And if you're focused on something up close for long periods of time, what you can cause is what's called a failure of accommodation, and the eye doesn't relax again when you look into the distance. So what happens? You're looking into the distance, but the muscles are contracted still, and it's blurry into the distance. And over time, this can actually begin to stretch the eyeball because during childhood, it's very soft and easy and very flexible. So There's a lot of epidemiological studies that we can look at comparing the rates of myopia among different countries. And this is a fascinating study because what we find is that the earlier, among people groups, the earlier they go to school and the more time they spend indoors, the higher the rates of myopia. Let me give a couple of illustrations. The US is around 50% myopic. Europe has a lot of variation. I believe Finland is right around 50% and lower in some other countries. But 50% would be an average in the US, a bit lower than that here in Western Europe. Now, East Asia. If myopia is dependent on age of school entrance and time spent indoors, would you expect it to be higher or lower in East Asia? Absolutely. It's 90%. With Seoul, Korea topping at 96% myopic, almost the entire population. Now, if you go to your eye doctor and you say, hey doc, why do I have these eye problems? He'll probably tell you it's genetic. Nothing you can do about it. The reality is research has shown for many years actually, that is only a minor factor. Myopia is actually nearsightedness is actually a lifestyle condition more than it is genetic. Genetics affect it, but lifestyle is much more significant. One of the most interesting studies I find on this was done in Alaska. Alaska is a state of the United States. And then when Alaska became a state, when the US bought it from Russia and it became a state, there was a change in the schooling because the US started requiring schooling at age 6, I believe it was. So previous to this, you had large populations of indigenous peoples, the Inuit, the Eskimo, who did not go to school, or at least not at an early age. And then it became a state, and you have an entire generation of young people going to school. So they did a study on the rate of myopia shortly thereafter. The children were 60% myopic. Now, if myopia is genetic, what percent would you expect to find in the parents and grandparents? Higher, exactly. You'd expect it to be more. What did they find? Can you see it? That was the percentage. Less than 1%. And it left them all going, okay, this is not genetic. There's a lifestyle factor here. So again, they do these studies all over the world, and I could show study after study, even within people groups, within similar genetics, but just a broad generalization around the world. It's interesting to look at. We've seen the US, 50, East Asia, 90%. Where do you think Africa lies? With large populations of indigenous people still, a lot more time outdoors, it's around 10 to 15%. And so the research finds there are two major factors in the development of myopia. One being close-up work. The other, though, is a lack of time outdoors. Both of those is a problem. When you take a child, right, you put them in the classroom, they're not outdoors, and they're focused on a book up close. So what about this lack of time outdoors? They find that children who spend less time outside are at a greater risk of developing myopia. And many studies have been done on this. You remember that the myopic eye is elongated. One study found that light stimulates the release of dopamine in the retina of the eye. And this neurotransmitter blocks the elongation of the eye during development. Did we catch the significance there? Remember, the myopic eye is elongated, and here the research is showing light is blocking the elongation of the eyeball. So light, I mean, what are we talking about? We need to just, lay down and stare at the lights or something? No. Right, you're right. So children need to spend around 3 hours per day under light levels of at least 10,000 lux to be protected against myopia. All right, a couple of numbers there we need to analyze. First of all, how many hours a day? 3 hours. 3 hours a day. That's a lot of time. Do you know what the average is? It's less than a half hour is the average. In some countries, it's even lower than that. Children almost do not go outside. But 3 hours per day. The amount of time you're going outside, and you'll find it's a challenge to get out there for that much time. And it can be a lot more than that. Nothing wrong with it being all day. But this 10,000 lux, how much is 10,000 lux? So if you go outdoors on a sunny day and you stand in the shade, you'd be getting about 10,000 lux. It's not full sunlight. Full sunlight's more than that. But it's full daylight. And lux is a measurement of the volume of light, not the intensity of the light. So outside these windows, the light levels are dropping now at this time in the evening, but we're probably still close to 10,000 outdoors right now. But as you come into this room, the light coming through these windows is dissipated into the volume of the room, and even though we try to amplify it with artificial lighting, it's very difficult to match full daylight. Do you know what, anyone want to take a guess, who hasn't heard this before, what an average well-lit classroom or office? This has good artificial lighting, maybe some windows. On average, a classroom or an office, who's going halves? I think it's 5,000. Okay? You think it's less, maybe, let's say a quarter. Let's be pessimistic. 2,500? Anyone? Okay. 500. You've heard this before? All right. It is. It's around 500. That's the average. That was a good guess. Far below what's really necessary for eye development. And children are not going to get that lux unless they're actually getting outside. So you've got to spend around 3 hours a day. I actually have a friend, and I've known of many instances of this, but this was just a personal friend who had very severe myopia. She was about 12 years old. She was told that at the rate her myopia was progressing, she'd be legally blind within about a year. And the mother asked the doctor, what do you think's causing this? Is there anything we can do? The doctor goes, no, it's genetic, nothing you can do about it. And the mother thought, this doesn't make any sense. She said, because the Bible says the curse causeless will not come. In other words, there's a reason, right? And she said, also, my son has perfect vision, and my daughter has this eye problem. Is genetics the only problem? So she did some research. She found this study that I'm talking about here, and she said, oh, that's interesting, because my son basically lives outdoors. I can't get him inside. And my daughter hates going outside. She's always indoors, always reading, always, loves playing the violin, doing a lot of reading, doing her homework, doing study, more that type, to be indoors. She said, oh, that's interesting. So she talked to her daughter. She said, we're going to do a little experiment. You're going to go outside for at least 2 hours a day. Oh, there was weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. But she said, this is the rule. You're going to go outside at least 2 hours every day. So she got out there. She actually did not do a lot of physical activity. She would do her homework outside. She practiced her violin outside. Didn't get the whole picture, but she was at least outdoors getting the light. 6 months later, they went back to the eye doctor. He examined her eyes. He said, I don't understand this. No progression. They said, thank you very much. Went home, didn't tell the doctor what they were doing. A year passed, back to the eye doctor. He examined her eyes. He said, I've never seen anything like this. I don't understand what's going on. I have no explanation for it, but your eyes are the same as they were a year ago. You've not had a progression in your myopia. And so they did tell the doctor what they were doing, and the doctor said, that's just coincidence. There's no connection. Of course, there was connection. These were God's methods, right? And the research actually shows that you can heal myopia. The problem is, a child gets diagnosed with slight myopia. I did a consult recently. Someone was telling me, they had their children's eyes examined, and the doctor said, oh, you need to get them in glasses right away. And I looked at the level. They were barely even myopic. It was just a tiny little bit. But what happens? Remember, looking at things up close stresses the eye. So what do? We put corrective lenses. What does that do to the eye's perspective? If you study the optics of it, it actually brings it closer to the eye. What's that going to do? Further stress the eye, which means what? Later you're going to need a stronger prescription. And it literally causes the myopia to develop when we put the lenses on at an early age. But it's well documented. We have a child, if they start developing some myopia, get them outdoors, take a few months break from any close-up work, and the eye can correct itself and heal. God created us to heal. So spend several hours outside every day, limit the close-up work and the reading, limit and eliminate the screen time, among other things. We'll talk more about that later. Okay. Teachers, or anyone who remembers what it was like to be in the classroom, what are the two most common commands given to children? Sit still, all right? And be quiet. Very good. Sit still and be quiet. So, when it comes to physical development, we know from research children need physical activity. They actually cannot develop without proper physical activity. I talked about some of the benefits of that yesterday, how it lays the foundation. We know from brain research it is essential for the development of the cerebellum. It is important for building connections between the neurons. It is important for developing what is known as the proprioceptive system, which is linked with an underdeveloped proprioceptive system is linked with learning disabilities. And children need to develop this through whole body activity. Probably the most fascinating link is something known as the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a chemical that is very beneficial for the brain at any age, but the link in childhood is that it is required for myelination to proceed. And it actually speeds the process of myelination and the extent of the final process. This is vital for development, right? We've talked about the myelination process. So we would want to ask, how do we get BDNF? Any guesses? Physical activity, when we move our muscles, it causes the release of a chain of proteins that triggers the release of BDNF into the brain. So literally, children have to move for their brain to develop. So what happens? We take a child, we put them in the classroom, we tell them, sit still, stop moving around so much. We're preventing their brain from developing. And what do we have here? Small children should be left free as lambs to run out of doors, to be free and happy. Should be allowed the most favorable opportunities to lay the foundation for sound constitutions. There we're talking about a foundation. Remember the example of the fruit tree. This is how you're developing strength, is in the physical activity. Now, I just want to give a little word of caution here. I think maybe some of us are familiar with this, and what I've often seen, and maybe some of us know of examples of this, we've misunderstood this to mean that in the morning, okay, free as lambs. So in the morning, we give them some breakfast, then open the door, come back at supper time. Have we seen this? And the children just grow up without any direction, just playing for 8 or 10 years until mom says, oh, you're 8 now. I better get serious about training you. Is that what this is saying? No, not at all. You have any lambs? You have any sheep here in Europe, in Austria? I'm sure we've seen this, right? When the little lambs are out playing, who's nearby? The shepherd, yes. Who else? The mother sheep, right? They're keeping a close eye. This is not talking about the absence of the mother. Or the father. This is talking about the environment. So as much as possible, much of the day as possible should be active. By all means, play together and work together. Spend time together and be active. Okay, but we talked about telling them to sit still. We're preventing the brain from developing. What about the language development? How many of us have ever noticed a group of children playing? Or shall I say, have you ever heard a group of children playing? Are they quiet? No, definitely not quiet. They're chattering and talking and laughing and yelling and running, and that's normal. Now, what about one child by himself? Just a little child playing. Is he quiet? Not usually, right? He continues talking to whom? To his toys, to himself, just carrying on a conversation. This is known as stream of consciousness speech, or sometimes called outer speech. You see, as children, they don't have the ability of inner speech, which is the ability to internalize your thoughts, think them through without saying it out loud. Children actually need to think out loud. And they have to verbalize it. And the process of learning to internalize their thoughts comes through verbalizing them, and then over time they start to develop the internalization. It's around 5 or 6, and then it moving on until around 8 when it's really begun to be very internalized. So what happens if we take a child and we tell them to sit still? Now we're preventing their brain from developing. And we tell them to be quiet. Now we're preventing them from thinking. Not a good recipe for proper childhood development, right? Good language, like the synapses that make it possible, is gained only from interactive engagement. Children need to talk as well as to hear. And in the classroom, it's just constant trying to talk to them rather than with them. Also, think about silent reading. Here's a statement from Dr. Carla Hannaford. So insistent is the need for outer speech, to hear one's own voice and thoughts, she's talking about during childhood, that silent reading is ineffective before the age of 7. Take a child, tell them to sit still, read a book to themselves. They're not going to get much out of it. They have to hear it. They have to verbalize it. So make sure you have lots of individual time with adults, be allowed to talk to themselves, and talk together. This is one of the best things you can do to help a child do well academically, is actually just engage in conversation. Research is very clear. This builds reading skills more than just about anything else, because you're building a practical, real-life vocabulary in the brain that later, when they start reading, they connect something to. And it's real and applicable. Okay. I know I'm moving quickly here. Again, bring up questions if you want clarification in the Q&A, or reference more videos on this on YouTube. Let's talk about emotional development. Now, it's well known from the research that emotional development lays the foundation for cognitive development. Children need solid emotional security for them to feel comfortable enough to learn. Now, that's not a conscious thing. But that's the brain's response, because the brain views emotional security as a fundamental need of survival. What are our needs of, what does it mean, a need of survival? What are our needs of survival? We need food, right? Food, water, warmth, shelter, things like that, okay? So if you are, let's say you're taking a hike in the beautiful Austrian mountains, and you get lost, and it's in the evening, and you miss the trail, and now it's dark, and it starts raining, and it's getting close to midnight, and you still can't find out where you are, and you're totally lost. Dark, raining, no food, you're hungry, you've been hiking all day, you trip and fall, you break your ankle. At this point, do you say, now is a great time to brush up on my algebra? You don't care about learning algebra right then, do you? What do you care about? Survival, exactly. It's somewhat like that for a child's brain, especially a small child. The brain views this connection with mom and dad and having emotional security as a fundamental need of survival. If they don't get that, the brain will focus solely on trying to obtain that to the expense of learning. This is why many times when we have a child with a learning disability, look into the home environment, you'll find abuse, neglect, divorce, something that's triggered this emotional insecurity that's giving them a problem in school. Not in every case, but many times this is something behind it. So what am I saying in all of this? This process of developing emotional security occurs over several years. It's about 7 or 8 years for girls, and even into 9 or 10 years for boys. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Boys actually have more emotional development needs than girls. And they need this connection with mom and dad for a long period of time. The first 3 years has to be constant. After that, it needs to be very dependable. What happens when we take a child, put them in school all day long, or at least several hours into the day? They don't have this dependable connection with mom and dad. And the brain starts to think, uh-oh, I might be in danger here. I'm not getting my survival needs. And they're going to struggle with the learning. But if we wait to build the foundation of emotional security, they'll actually do better with the learning later on. How do we build emotional security? That's time, human connection, and relationship. Quality relationship is absolutely key. All right, lots of research on that. Quote from Harvard, Dr. Raymond Moore in his book School Can Wait wrote extensively on this. But we're going to move quickly through some other points here because there's another aspect of this I want to get to. Social development. Will children be socially deprived if we don't put them in school at an early age? This is the lie that we've been told, and yes, I said lie. It is completely false. Children need a wide range of ages, but they especially need mom and dad for proper social development. It's really common sense. I could talk about all the studies. I could talk about the studies on socialization done between public school students and homeschooled students, and they found the homeschooled students were 3 times better socialized than the public schooled students. This is on objective socialization assessments done by Larry Shires and Thomas Smedley, 2 studies that were done. But all of this comes with common sense also. Are we training our children to be children or to be adults? Do we want to prepare them for real life? In real life, are we the same age here? Are we all 30 years old and you can't come in unless you're 30, right? No, that's not real life. We need to interact with a wide range of ages, and we need to provide children this experience while they're young so that they can learn this interaction. Children learn good socialization skills from adults, first of all, and from a wide range of ages. We actually result in negative and poor socialization by taking the child and putting them in a group of equal age peers. Ask me more on that in the Q&A if you want that tomorrow. Okay, memory development is fascinating. We would tend to think that school would develop good memory skills because you have to memorize a lot, right? The reality is it makes the memory worse. They find that people groups, indigenous people groups in the world, unschooled indigenous people groups actually have the best memories out of any groups that have been studied. What happens is as we spend time in the classroom, especially at an early age, the brain learns to depend on an external source to hold the information. I can always refer back to the textbook, right? And the memorization becomes rote and artificial rather than connected with real life. And the studies, maybe I'll just read this. This is incredible. The North Queensland Aborigines recite a song by memory that takes 5 nights to complete. Primitive peoples can observe a herd of several hundred animals and detect the absence of a single animal and know which one it is without counting. Many of their vocabularies are full of names for very detailed aspects of the world around them. This is incredible. I've actually seen it. I remember an experience in Tanzania, Africa. And I was at a large mission and sharing some of this material. And an individual came up to me afterward and said, you know, I can attest to that. She explained that there at the mission, they have a large herd of cattle. And they hire Maasai. Anyone know of the Maasai? A famous tribe in Africa for taking care of cows. They hire Maasai men to take care of their cattle. And this person told me, these men can bring the cows to get water in the evening. And they merely glance over the herd and they tell their buddy, hey, we're missing such and such a cow. And they just name the cow. Out of, it could be many, many. And she said one day, she went and she talked to them. She goes, I'm kind of the director here. I'm supposed to be, in charge of this. Can you please teach me how you guys know when you're missing a cow? And they looked at her with shock on their face, like, how do you not know when you're missing a cow? I mean, that's obvious. And it was to them, right? And it's just an example of what I've seen and heard many other examples of that, well, it's explained here. While the schooled person depends heavily on external signs, such as the written word, to hold knowledge for him, the primitive native depends on memory. Every detail of a landscape is remembered with what seems to be a photographic memory, even the first time passing through. Though most children have an eidetic memory, it is rare among schooled adults, but not among primitive non-schooled adults. So we're training the mind to depend on something else. We need that natural experience spending time in practical work especially. Okay, now I want to briefly touch on a big question for a lot of parents, and that is the development of reading skills, because we've been taught that we need to start the reading really early. And I mean, parents now, they're like reading to the child while they're still in the womb, and flashcards as soon as possible, and baby Einstein and whatever else has come up with to try to teach the child to read at an early age. And we have it in our mind that you've got to start them early or they'll never learn to read well. In reality, the opposite is true. In fact, if we look around the world, some of the countries that start reading instruction the earliest and the most intensive have the lowest rates of literacy. Whereas countries that start later typically have very high rates of literacy, Scandinavian countries, for example. So, the question would be, okay, what is the right age to start reading? What's the correct age? Let's keep this in mind. In many schools, children are identified as behind with reading before they would have even started school in many other countries. You ever think about that? In the UK, for example, typically they start pretty early with the reading instruction. A child might be 6, not reading well, and they say, oh no, they're delayed. In Finland, they haven't even gone to school yet. Nobody's worried about whether they're reading or not. They're not delayed at all. So what's delayed? According to whom, right? The reality is what's more important is not so much the age, but the foundation that we lay. What is a good foundation for reading? The foundation for later reading, and in particular reading comprehension, is language. Okay, so if we want to help our children learn to read, we need to start with good language skills. How do we develop good language skills? Talking, exactly. It's a pretty simple one. Every parent can do this, and every child usually likes to do it. They love to ask questions. Take advantage of that. Engage in conversation. Answer those questions, ask questions back, and you're actually building a good foundation for the reading skills. So, first step, talk together. Secondly, answer the questions. When they say, Mom, how do I write my name? Mom, what's that sign say? Mom, can you read me this book? Mom, what's that name of that book? How do I write this letter? Can you show me how to do an A? Whatever it is. Answer those questions. Take a little moment here and there. And what you're doing is actually building a framework, building a foundation. And what will usually happen in the majority of cases is that as we focus on this, rather than the flashcards and the word lists and the drills and trying to help them learn, just focus on building a foundation. And when the brain's ready, they'll put it together and teach themselves how to read. And I've seen it it's actually studied in a great majority of cases. A child will literally teach themselves how to read when they're ready for it. And how much stress we can avoid, right? Rather than this pressure at an early age, which actually tends to result in poor reading. Typically, when we follow this model, and then I'll add a third point here, make sure when you're using books, it's not something you're forced to have to read that's uninteresting, but rather it's something interesting, stories, you're looking up some information you want to learn, something like that. And when we follow this, learning to read can be quite easy. It doesn't need to be the stress that we usually make it. Children actually have much better reading comprehension and fluency when we start later. There was a study done, there have been many, but I'll mention just this one, comparing two groups of children with two different reading ages, reading instructional age. So this is the RIA, stands for reading instruction age. The blue is a group who started at 5. The orange is a group that started at 7. This is measuring their decoding and reading fluency. So we have the first group at 5 beginning, second group 6 continuing. Sorry, I said that wrong. First group continuing at age 6. Second group beginning at age 7, continuing at age 8. Now let's just suppose we stop the study right here at age 8. What would we conclude? Exactly, you have to start at age 5. We better start early because look how much more advanced they are at age 8. Think about age 8. Those of you who have 8-year-olds, we're doing a lot of comparison at this age, right? Are they reading it? How are they doing? How's their grades? How's their math? But what if we just got a little more patient and we wait a year? Look what happens. between 8 and 9, the group who started later caught up with the ones who started earlier. Why? Because they were able to use the more efficient regions of the brain. We hadn't formed improper habits of reading by trying to push it too early. And then look what happens. Look here at age 11. Can we fairly say it was a waste of 2 years to start earlier? Yeah, they actually were better off by waiting. And I know the question came up earlier, probably will come up again. Okay, what about those children who teach themselves how to read out of their own interest? Again, that's okay as long as we also need to recognize that many times our children are in such a literary environment that it's only natural that they want to learn those things. But sometimes we need to do a little redirection, spend more time outdoors, and there won't be such a drive to spend time in the books. But it's still, some children do learn how to read naturally at an earlier age. It's okay to know how. We're not preventing that. But we can understand that when it comes to actually teaching them, waiting will help. And what happens if they learn to read early? We need to keep the reading to a minimum and short periods of time so we don't stress the eyes, as we've talked about already. Okay? Again, lots of studies on this. The children who started at 5 developed less positive attitudes to reading and showed poorer text comprehension than those children who started later. We often bring up Montessori schools, which are famous for teaching reading early, and they found the Montessori children did have an advantage over the public school children at age 5, but look what happened by age 12. No advantage again. And here's the thing that we often forget about, and I'm going to focus on this in just a minute here, but we can focus on the reading abilities, but I want to ask, what did those Montessori children miss out on in that time that we were focused on the reading? Relationship building, character development, time in nature, practical work, all those things, that's what should be happening when they're young. All right. This was amazing. This particular study, let me just mention it. 2 kindergarten classrooms. Actually districts, so there were more than one kindergartens. In one district, they put children in intensive reading instruction, starting in kindergarten. Excellent tutors, lots of books, very interesting, everything to give them a head start at reading. Another group, 0 reading instruction. Just science, learning hands-on science, practical work. The books were there if they wanted them. Third grade, so we've gone 4 years later. They tested those children on reading abilities. The group with 0 reading instruction, initially, they'd had probably some by 3rd grade, but the ones who had started off with 0 reading instruction were more advanced in their reading skills than those who had had specialized tutoring and reading instruction. So again, the studies are very consistent on that. All right. We've covered these practical points. The effect on boys, we're going to cover this more in depth tomorrow, so I'm just moving past this just to mention that because of the difference in brain development, all the negative effects we're talking about, you're going to see them more strongly in the boys. This is why boys are struggling more in school than the girls, okay? And again, we'll cover all that tomorrow. ADHD, we don't have time to go into it. Ask me about it in the Q&A if you want, but the research is very clear. There was a well-known study out of Stanford University that showed that delaying kindergarten entrance will significantly lower the incidence of ADHD. One study found a 1-year delay in school entrance reduced the incidence of ADHD behavior by 73%. That is major in the research. 73% reduction with just 1 year. Can you imagine if we wait till 8 to 10, right? So a lot of research on that. Now, a couple other points on this. Will the children be left behind if we wait until 8 to 10? Now, here's the beauty of it. No, they won't be left behind. They'll actually do a lot better because the brain is ready. Children who start the academic study after age 8 usually end up far ahead of the early starters. When we give them time for their minds to develop, they will experience a lot less frustration. When the academics do begin, they'll learn a lot faster because they're ready to learn it. Study after study has shown this. Here was a study on 300 individuals who started school at around age 8 or later. All of them quickly caught up with their classes, in most cases performed well above the class average. There's substantial agreement among school entrance age researchers that children who enter school later are significantly higher in academic achievement than those who enter earlier. The late starters generally excel in behavior, social skills, leadership. And we say, how is this possible? Let me give a simple example, okay? I'm not saying that this is an exact what is taught in each grade, but this is kind of a scenario of how we usually do school, and we're going to make a contrast, all right? So let's imagine in first grade, we're going to start with some basic addition, some basic math. So brain's not quite ready for it, but we can do it through a lot of drill and repetition, right? So we're going to do 3 plus 5. They don't have a concept of the addition, but you can teach it on paper. And you have to do 3 plus 5 as well as 3 plus 4 and 3 plus 6 and 3 plus 7 and 3 plus 8 and 3 plus 9 and 4 plus 7 and lots of repetition, right? That's how we're used to doing it, okay? But we managed to get through first grade. Anyone have the answer to this problem? 8, okay, thank you very much. Very good. All right, so second grade, what are we going to do? Well, typically, we take the same subjects and we just learn them over again the next year, more difficult. Again, I'm not saying this is what is taught in each grade exactly. Maybe add some addition, multiplication, things like that, but it's an illustration. We take the same subjects, we make them more difficult. Still not ready for it, but we do lots of repetition, all right? And yes? Okay, this is around, the question was when I say first grade, second grade. First grade, around age 6. Typically, kindergarten starts around 5, first grade, age 6. There's some 1 to 2 year variation depending on where you live. Okay, so again, lots more repetition. Anyone have the answer to this math problem? Very good, all right. It's third grade, what are we gonna do? Same subjects, more difficult, lots more repetition. Anyone have the answer? 289, very good. You guys are quick. Fourth grade, what are we going to do? Same subjects, more difficult, lots more repetition. I see the wheels turning. Very good. That was pretty good. All right, the point here was not to do math, but this is how we usually function in school, right? Every year we learn the same subjects, make them more difficult. Now let's imagine another scenario. Let's suppose first grade, second grade, maybe third grade, we just learned from real life. I've already asked, can we learn math in real life? Absolutely. Lots of opportunities. We wait until the child is older, and we say, okay, let's take what you already know from real life, you already understand the concepts, let's put it on paper. So you take a child, let's imagine this scenario again, but you take a child who's older, who understands the concepts, and you say, okay, let me show you something here. Let's get a paper, let's get a pencil. Here's an example. What's 3 plus 5? You ask the child. And the child goes, oh, that's 8. He knows it well from real life, right? He can figure that out. Okay, let me show you how to do that. You put the 3 right there, you put the plus sign, you write the 5, you put a line under it, and you put the 8 beneath it. And the child goes, oh, okay, that's easy enough, right? Okay, let me ask you another one. What's the next one there? 14 plus 16. The child thinks that's 30. Okay, let me show you how to write that. And you put the 14 and the 16, and this time you got to carry, right? They add the 1, bring that down, and you teach them how to do that. In 20 minutes, you could teach this whole thing to a child who knows it, who already understands the concepts, right? So you see, what we usually do is we start with paper, and we tell them, you'll use this someday, you'll put it in practice someday, when it's better, and then when we try to put it in practice someday, they don't have the connections made, and we route it to the wrong part of the brain. But what if we focus on the practical learning first, and then apply that to paper? It works so much better, much more efficient. And the beauty of this is it allows more time for what is most important. And this is where I want to transition right now and spend a few minutes talking about some points on this topic. Again, those of you who have heard my seminars before probably are familiar with this material. It's good to repeat it. But now I want to take some of these principles and apply them into something else that I've not often talked about, and I think it's really important in true education, and that has to do with the spiritual development. The early years are a window of time for developing spirituality, cause to effect reasoning, relationships, behavior, moral conscience, character, all these things. The foundation is laid in the first years of life. We want to focus on this. And what, in reality, this counsel that we have of until age 8 to 10, the parent should be the teacher, they should be learning from outdoors, they should be learning practical things, all this counsel, often we focus on it from the perspective of don't do the academics. And that's kind of what we've just done, right? We've expounded on why we shouldn't do that, which is true. But the point of the counsel is not so much on what not to do. It's more on what we should be doing. And it's telling parents, you need to focus on character training in the early years. And this character training is so important and so time-consuming, it's a full-time job and you don't have time for anything else. Focus on the character development. That's what really the essence of this message is. It's about laying that foundation for character and spiritual development in the early years. So we have early growth and late fruit. But we're often in a hurry to get the fruit without being willing to have the graft development that we talked about at the beginning, the rootstock development as we talked about, the tree to grow and become strong enough to bear that fruit. We're often unwilling to wait for that. Now, early academic training is not the only problem. Pardon, something in my eye. I want to address another aspect of this, even moving forward and growing into the later years. And this is something I've seen to be very common, even among homeschooling families or those who understand this message of not starting the academics too early. But we have a tendency, we sort of were like, okay, we're not going to pressure the academics. We need to focus on the spiritual development, but we misunderstand what spiritual development really means. And we think that spiritual development means getting up in front of church and reciting their memory verses, or getting out and doing this public, outward sort of what we usually term missionary activity, and we think that that's spiritual development. That's not the model we find in the scriptures. Let me give some examples. The Levites. Does anyone know at what age the Levites entered the service of the tabernacle? Anyone know? There were two ages, actually. 25 was the when they could enter in the basic service of the maintenance and helping, basically. 25 years old. They were 30 when they were allowed to do what the Bible calls the most holy things. We don't know exactly what all that involved, but what I understand from it is that there must have been sort of an apprenticeship time. Maybe it was 25, they began the basic service, and they were learning throughout that time, developing the maturity, and then they could enter in the more holy things at age 30. Whatever it was 25 before they were even allowed to go there. And I want to say it this way, we have no example of junior Levites. And this is something we do often as a church, trying to push our children into these more public roles of responsibility in the church, thinking this will somehow keep them there, or this will somehow give them experience and develop spiritual maturity. That's not the example we find in the scriptures. Spiritual maturity is developed in the family and we're going to look at several examples, in obscurity. In what? Obscurity. No one notices it. No one is applauding them. No one's saying, oh, look at this child. Wow, they must have amazing parents, and look at their memory verses. No, we don't find that in the Bible. Let's look at a few examples. Joseph. What age was he when he began, when he took the throne of Egypt? Anyone know? This is Genesis. Yeah, it's 30. Genesis 41:46 says he was 30. Did he go through a period of training before that? Oh, poor Joseph. He had a lot of tough training, didn't he? We know that he passed his youth in the true education environment of his home, which the book Education says had 3 important components: his father teaching him, useful work, and communion with God. A time of obscurity. And then he had the prison and many other factors. How about Moses? How old was Moses when he started his ministry? 80. 80. Question, did Moses try to bear fruit too soon? He did. God said, you're not ready yet. You haven't developed strength of dependence upon me. You don't have roots yet. Time for some time in the wilderness. I'm not suggesting we wait till 80, but the reality is, God knows how long it needs to be. We need to wait on him and not push it too early. How about Joshua, the second to Moses? We don't know his age exactly, but we do know he would have been, let's imagine, okay, we know before the 40 years, he went as a spy. How old would you have been as a spy? 20, 25, 30, something like this, okay? Then we have the 40 years of the wilderness before Moses dies and he takes over. So Joshua would have been at least, let's say, 60, minimum 60 years old before he was committed the leadership of the nation. But here's another key. Did Joshua have a training time? He had 40 years under the tutelage of Moses. And this is a model that we're given in the Spirit of Prophecy, that our young men need to be learning from the older ones, not pushed out into public ministry too early. How about David? How old was David when he began to reign, when he took the throne? He was 30 also. How about Solomon? Now this is an interesting one. We don't know exactly how old he was. We can do a few calculations and get a pretty good idea. But he must have been, as best that I can figure, at least in his early 20s. When we look at the chronology, and there's a lot of dates and figures in chronology you can compare, it was sometime around in his early 20s, probably. And remember in his prayer, he said, I am a little child. The early 20s was considered very young to take this level of responsibility. How about Elisha? He was called as a youth. We, again, don't know exactly how old he was. But did Elijah come to Elisha and say, you're the man now? Go for it. I'm going into retirement. Is that what he said? No. He called Elisha. What does it say that Elisha did? Remember what the Bible says? He poured water on the hands of Elijah. This was a period of training in the simple duties of life. Quietude, obscurity. Are we seeing a pattern here? Now, someone will mention in the Q&A tomorrow, if I don't answer it right now, what about Samuel? He was young. Okay, true. First of all, this is an anomaly in the scriptures. This is a one-off example. It's not the pattern that we find everywhere. Secondly, though, and this is a more important point, Samuel did not enter his active public ministry until much later. In fact, we know from the Spirit of Prophecy that Eli treated Samuel like his own son and taught him, and Samuel did the little duties of helping out. And he had a period of training. We don't know exactly how old he was when Eli died and he became a prophet in Israel, but it was later than the early age that he came to the temple. So even in this, we find the principle to be true. And here is our final and most beautiful example, that of Jesus himself. How old was Jesus when he entered ministry? He was 30. Question. Did Jesus have important things to do? The universe was waiting on him. I mean, they had to just put everything on hold while Jesus came to the earth for 33 and a half years. Couldn't Jesus have made that a little quicker? Right? I firmly believe that Jesus took those 30 years because there is a lesson in that for us. 30 years of obscurity. How many verses do we have in the Bible about Jesus' childhood? 1 or 2? How many verses about his 3.5 years of ministry? Half the New Testament, right? You see where the emphasis is? And it tells us in the Desire of Ages, his quiet and simple life, even the silence of the scriptures concerning his early years, teach an important lesson. The very fact that we don't know anything about, or at least not very much, about his early years, that in and of itself is a lesson. There is growth in obscurity. We're laying a foundation. And it tells us, the more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement and the more in harmony with nature, the more favorable it is to physical and mental vigor and spiritual strength. This is your standard of measurement, parents. Quiet, simple, free from the artificial. Harmony with nature. Here's another statement. Jesus was 30 years old before he entered public ministry. Why? Well, it explains. The period of his childhood and youth was one of comparative obscurity, but of the highest importance. He was in this obscurity, laying the foundation of a sound constitution and vigorous mind. He grew and waxed strong in spirit. Are we grasping this? This time of obscurity was a time where he's laying the foundation, developing root, bonding that graft like we talked about. Simple things while young. This is important. I just realized I think I have a slide out of order here. Okay, here we go. Now, I want to give some practical examples of this in closing, just to really help us understand. We need the simplicity in childhood. So what sort of things can we do that's not simple? Well, here's an example. Children need appreciation, sympathy, and encouragement. But care should be taken not to foster in them a love of praise. Do our children often get praise when they're in more public, quote, ministry, right? It is not wise to give them special notice or to repeat before them their clever sayings. The parent or teacher who keeps in view the true ideal of character and the possibilities of achievement cannot cherish or encourage self-sufficiency. He will not encourage in the youth, the desire or effort to display their ability or proficiency. I find this interesting because it says the teacher will, or the parent will not encourage in the youth the desire to display their ability. Many times, though, it's the parent who wants them to display their ability because it makes the parent look good, right? He who looks higher than himself will be humble, yet he will possess a dignity that is not abashed or disconcerted by outward display or human greatness. So what's the principle here? To not encourage selfishness, not encourage pride, self-sufficiency, a desire to display ability. And there are so many ways in which we do this. You know, one of the ways that we do it is putting our children in front. They may not be preaching like this, but putting them in front in some capacity, yeah? We have this idea that we need to get our children up front, to have them do things for the church, to make them recite their memory verses, to do this, quote, missionary work. But again, that's not the model we find in the scriptures. It is, let me just explain a little here, because it's a myth, really, well-intentioned, but it's a myth that putting a child up in front in church will help them practice or prepare for doing it as a result, or help them overcome stage fright, things like this that we talk about. In reality, the opposite is true. A good foundation in emotional security in the home will help with stage fright far more than getting up front and doing it. If they're nervous, in reality, pushing a child to the front when they're nervous actually only exacerbates the nervousness. What they need is more time, more development, more emotional security that is built. Now, if they like getting up front and they're not nervous, typically we think, oh, great, let them do it. That's an even bigger problem because it means that they've learned to like the attention, at least. Even if it's not praise, at least it's the attention. And we've read that we should not be allowing that. Some people say, well, it's the Spirit of Prophecy says in the end times, children will be preaching the gospel when adults can't. And so we need to be preparing them for this. It's not exactly what it says. It says that this will be miraculous. In the examples of the past and in the future, the Holy Spirit will intervene and use these children in a miraculous way because there is no option for the adults to do that. It does not say that they've been practicing their sermons and so the time comes that they take this role. No, this is a miraculous something. They need to be prepared, yes. How are they prepared? In the same way that Jesus was prepared. In the obscurity, the quietude of the right foundation in the home. And I've seen many times children who appeared very spiritually grounded. They preached sermons. They could recite memory verses. But at home, well, they weren't such little angels. And I've seen many reach young adulthood and not be so interested in spiritual things as it appeared they were when they were younger. Why? Because they lacked a root. The graft hadn't bonded. Musical performance. This is another one. We read musical talent too often fosters pride and ambition for display. This is a big temptation. While I'm on the topic of music, ask me about this in the Q&A if you want. I can elaborate on it. But the principle of learning music applies to what we're talking about here. Later is better when it comes to formal music study. Children should be exposed to music, singing, playing around on the piano, things like that. But when it comes to formal lessons, it is better to wait until around 8 to 10. They will typically learn a lot faster. They have the maturity for it. You won't have to tell them to practice. They will advance in a few months what it often takes a child a few years to learn when they're started earlier. And they appreciate the real purpose and the joy of music better when they're started later. And so we need to be careful about this also. Now, what about as they get older? Here's a principle to keep in mind. Let our young men and young women go forth as evangelists and Bible workers. So, is there a role to fill in public work? Absolutely. But notice, again, it says, in company with a worker of experience who can show them how to labor successfully. So, and again, we're not talking about childhood here. It says young men and young women. So when that age comes, even then we don't send them by themselves. There's development of experience that has to happen. The inexperienced ones should not be sent out alone. They should stand right by the side of older and experienced ministers where they could educate them. And, I've seen the sad story as I've worked in a lot of mission organizations around the world. I've seen many young people who are sent out for mission service who lose their way spiritually in that time. We often focus on what a benefit and a blessing it is to them, and it can be for many young people in the right environment, but I've also seen many lose their way. What's actually more successful is if the whole family goes and serves. This is a beautiful thing I've seen many times. So, it's just a warning that we need to be very careful. As it says, they should not be sent out alone. So, in closing, we talked about the fruit tree. We saw there was a need to develop a strong graft, the strong roots, the strong limbs before we start bearing the fruit. Otherwise, we stunt the tree. So, suppose you had this tree right here. How many of you would be excited to see this in the springtime? Let's be honest. I know I've given the background. You're like, I probably shouldn't raise my hand. But yes, let's be honest. We'd be excited, right? Yay, wow, look at this incredible harvest of fruit I'm going to have. What's going to happen to this little tree, though, if every one of those flowers pollinates? Any good orchardist knows something here. As difficult as it is to wait, every one of those flowers or those little fruits that develop, depending on the tree and the species and what it is, a lot of times you wait till the fruit just starts, every one of those needs plucked off. You don't want any fruit to be born right now at this stage. Why? Because you recognize it's a time that that graft is still developing and the roots are still growing. This is a foundational growth stage, and a good orchardist knows that though the fruit looks good, and everyone will congratulate him on his fruit trees. Wow, I can't believe it. Look at your fruit. He knows something. It's not good for the long-term health of the tree. He knows that he needs to actually prevent the fruit at this age and allow the strength to develop and the foundation to be laid. So what's the point here? It's not only that we don't push the fruit early. We've kind of talked about that. It's also that we may need to, you know what God did to Moses, right? He said, not time yet, not ready yet. We may, as parents sometimes, we may need to redirect and actually hold it back a little bit. Not so much out of the child's interest, but out of the social pressure that parents face. And I'll close with this statement. The gradual development of the plant from the seed is an object lesson in child training. We've been talking about the tree, but we find the same thing in the growth of the plant. There's first the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. He who gave this parable created the tiny seed, gave it its vital properties, and ordained the laws that govern its growth. The little ones should be educated in childlike simplicity. They should be trained to be content with what? The small, helpful duties. There we have it, in the home, simple things. The pleasures and experiences natural to their years. Childhood answers to the blade in the parable, and the blade has a beauty peculiarly its own. Children should not be forced into a precocious maturity, but as long as possible should retain the freshness and grace of their early years. As long as possible. Isn't that amazing? You know, if we have that little corn plant coming up, what can we do to get corn sooner? Can we put some sort of device on it that slowly pulls it over time? What do you think would happen? Those roots would always be strained, or you might uproot the plant. It'd be stunted, right? You have to wait. In fact, you have to give that plant what it needs at that stage. How many grow corn? Anyone? Oh, one corn grower, two corn growers? Okay. Those of you who know corn know that there's two stages. Well, not two stages only, but they're in the early weeks, months of the corn growing, it needs lots of water. Later on, when the ears are forming and you're waiting for it to dry and turn into grain, you don't want water, right? And it's just an example. You have to give it what it needs at its stage of development. And you try to hurry that up. What if you say, okay, no, I want that grain faster and no water now? The plant will just be stunted. It actually won't produce as well. I think I've made the point well. I hope I've made the point well. Give our children what they need in the early years. Focus on the foundational elements, on developing strength through time in the home, emotional development, emotional security in the home. Focus on the character development. If you live in a state that government, that requires certain things, work with that, but minimize it as much as you can. Focus on the practical learning instead of just relying on the textbooks. And consider moving to an area that makes it easier. And by all means, trust in God's ways because they are best. And they will work because God's methods always work. All right? Sorry I went a little over time. This is a message that's really hard to condense. I hope we're not too tired. Tomorrow's will be shorter. But let's close with a word of prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, thank you for all that we've learned. Thank you for your beautiful methods and your counsel to us. I pray you'll speak to us and show us what changes we need to make if there's something you're wanting us to adjust to bring us into harmony with your will and your plan. I Pray for each family here that you'll give them wisdom, and that may they develop that good foundation so that we can have strong workers in your cause, fruit-bearing later on. And we thank you. We ask for a good night's rest, and that we'll all be refreshed in the morning. And we thank you and ask in Jesus' name, amen.